So hello students, let's continue the series on detailed analysis on diagrams exclusively for 10th ICSE and 10th CBSE board examinations. Today I have come up with another system, that is reproductive system, in both males as well as in females. So let's connect with the diagrams. Come on. So first we have this female reproductive system. So before proceeding, I would like to say that females have primary sex organs, or what we can say primary reproductive organs. We call it as ovaries. We call them as ovaries. So in each female there is a pair of ovary. That means we have two ovaries inside us. So let's label them. Let's start labeling them. This structure, this oval-like structure is called as ovaries. These are the primary sex organs. What do we understand by the term primary? Primary means the main or the principal. So these are the primary reproductive organs in females. Fine. Now what does they do? They produce ovum. Now what is an ovum? Ovum is a female gamete, or we can say it's a reproductive cell. What do we understand by the reproductive cell or a gamete? The cells which participates in the process of fertilization so that a new individual can be created or continued. So these ovaries produce ovum. We are going to mention the function simultaneously. So produce ovum. Now I would like to highlight one thing here. Ovum basically is produced inside a follicle. What do we understand by the term follicle? Follicle is basically a sac or a bag like structure inside which ovum develops. We are going to detail on the process in the next video. So these produce ovum. Now when the ovum is produced and it is matured, then these finger-like structures, if you see it carefully, these are finger-like structures, kind of like this. They are situated like this. So what does they do? They help in the collection of the matured ovum. Okay, the ovum which has got matured. Now these finger-like structures collect the ovum so that it can assist its further pathway into the uterus. Now what happens? These finger-like structures are called as fimbriae. These are called as fimbriae. So what are these? Finger-like structures which help in the collection of the mature ovum. Now, when it has collected, now what happens? This tube-like structure is called as fallopian tube. Or we can say it as oviduct. Why do we call it as oviduct? Word has been derived from the ovum. Duct means passage or lining through which ovum passes. So it is called as oviduct. Now what is its function? Fallopian tube basically gives a passage for the ovum to travel to the uterus. Fine. So transfers ovum further towards the uterus. Just a minute. Now, one more thing. This fallopian tube, along its walls or along its lining, there are finger-like minute, or we can say tiny finger-like structures, kind of these. Okay, we called it as cilia. These are basically finger-like structures or hair-like structures which act like a viper, like we see the viper in our cars or in four-wheelers. So viper, it acts like a viper which continuously oscillates like this and helps in assisting the ovum towards the uterus. In fact, it pushes the ovum towards the uterus. Fine. Now what happens? This funnel like structure, this common passage, or we can say this is in the shape of an inverted pear. Okay, it is in the shape of an inverted pear. This inverted pear shaped structure or the funnel shaped structure, this is called as uterus. Uterus. What is its main function? It provides the space for the development of the child or the embryo after fertilization. Fine. So, provides the space for the development of the fertilized zygote, or more prominently the embryo. We are going to understand the whole process of fertilization in the next video. So now basically today we are going to understand just the diagrams and its associated parts. So now after uterus, you could easily see there is a constricted part. This is a constricted narrow part. Okay, this is a narrow constricted area. We called it as cervix. We called it as cervix. Fine. Now as we go along, this region is basically called as vagina. This is called as vagina. And the outermost opening in females, this is called as vulva. One thing I would like to mention here, that this vagina and cervix together makes up the birth canal. Now what we need to understand one thing, that while parturition, when the delivery of the matured baby is done, it can either happen in two ways, either a normal delivery or a C-section delivery, that is cesarean section delivery. So while whenever there is a normal delivery, the developed child passes through this canal. What canal? This is cervix and through the vagina. So cervix and vagina together are called as birth canal. This is the birth canal. Okay, so let's revise from the beginning. First we have ovaries. What does they do? They are basically primary reproductive organs in females. They produce ovum. These are the female gamete. Fine. Now after the ovum has become mature, these finger-like structures, what we called it as fimbriae, helps in collecting the matured ovum and further assist it into the further accessory reproductive tract. Now what happens, when once the fimbriae has collected the matured ovum, it transfers to the fallopian tube. Now fallopian tube can be also called as oviduct, since duct, as I have said, duct is a passage through which anything goes or can be passed through. So this ovi means, we are relating this word, this ovi word is derived from ovum itself. So the passage for ovum, fallopian tube. Now what is its main function? Transfers ovum further towards the uterus. Now what is the main function of this uterus? Uterus actually provides a space for the developing embryo. Now when there is as we go along, there is a constricted part, there is a constricted narrow part, we called it as cervix. Now next comes vagina, and finally this is the opening. Vulva is the opening in females. This is opening. Okay, so this is the ultimate or the terminating part in female reproductive system. And lastly, this cervix and vagina together makes up the birth canal. I hope you have understand and got a good idea of the important parts of the female reproductive tract. So let's make a flow chart on this. Let's make a flow chart on this for the better clarity. So starting from ovaries, let's start it from ovaries. Then we have this fimbriae. Also this fimbriae. Next is fallopian tube. Fallopian tube, or we can say it as oviduct. One more thing needs to be mentioned here. This fallopian tube is basically divided into 3 parts. So for 10th standard, it is not required to learn all the 3 parts. When you go to your higher classes, you will be getting to know all those sub parts in fallopian tube as well. Next we have, after fallopian tube, is uterus. Next we have this cervix. Finally we have vagina, and ultimately we have this vulva. Now let's mention the functions along it. So ovaries basically produce ovum. Also it produces two hormones, that is estrogen, also some amount of progesterone. Why did I specify in fact some amount of progesterone? Because basically the progesterone is produced by the corpus luteum. That we are going to understand when we deal with the topic of menstrual cycle. Okay, so progesterone and estrogen. Now after ovaries we have this fimbriae. Fimbriae is basically what? It's a finger-like structure. That helps in the collection of the ovum, mature ovum. This should be specified, mature ovum. Only when the the ovum gets matured, then only it can released inside the, or the fimbriae can collect it to assist it further into the reproductive tract. So now we have fallopian tube or the oviduct. As I have already specified, ovi means ovum. This word is derived from ovum. Duct means passage through which ovum passes through. Now fallopian tube and oviduct basically helps in transfers the mature ovum towards the uterus. And how does it do? It has cilia along its walls. So cilia acts like a viper which continue to oscillate and push the mature ovum towards the uterus. Now uterus, this is the main part. This provides space for the development of the implanted embryo. Okay, the embryo which has got implanted inside the uterus endometrium, it provides space for that particular embryo, because many a times embryo does not get implanted just because of the fluctuations of hormones or something or the other reason. So provide space for the development of the embryo or implanted. I would suggest to mention the implanted embryo term. Even if you just specify embryo, that is also going to work. Next we have the cervix. This is the constricted or narrow region of the female reproductive tract. Next we have this vagina. We have vagina and finally vulva. This is the opening or the termination part. Opening of the female reproductive tract. So we are finished with the female reproductive system. Now let's switch on to the male reproductive system. So now basically we are going to first start with the primary male reproductive organs. For that we are going to connect to this diagram, and later on we are going to switch to this diagram as well for relating things in a better way. So let's start. So as we have already started in case of female reproductive system, that there are primary organs for the production of female gametes. Similarly, there are primary organs for the production of male gametes. What are male gametes? Male gametes, gamete is basically a reproductive cell which participates in the process of fertilization to produce a zygote. So if you connect with the diagram, you can see, if you see this diagram carefully, then there are organs, there are primary organ in case of males as well for the production of male gametes. So similarly, in what we have seen in case of female reproductive system, that there are paired female reproductive organs. Similarly, there is paired reproductive organ in case of males as well. So if you see the diagram carefully, this oval like structure is basically the primary male reproductive organ. We called it as testis. This is primary male reproductive organ. Now let's recall what we have studied in case of female reproductive system is that the production and the maturation of the ovum takes place at the same site, that is the ovaries. But in case of males, the production and the maturation of sperm takes place in different sites. So this testis basically produces the sperm. This produces the sperm. So this is the site for production of sperms. Site for production of sperms. Now there is a coil-like structure, this structure is somewhat coil-like, which is present at the posterior region of the testis. At the posterior region of, you may encounter with the terms like anterior and posterior. The anterior is basically the front part or the part that is highlighted more, and the posterior part is the back part, the part which has overlapped with some other part. So this is the posterior part of the testis. This is somewhat coil-like. This we called it as epididymis. The main function of this epididymis is to provide a space for the sperms to get matured. Okay, so this provides space for the sperms to become mature. What it actually does, it improves the motility of the sperm, that is the swimming and the lashing movements in case of sperm. Now once the sperm is produced, it has got matured, now it is destined to get transported. For the transportation part, it needs a passage or a duct. As I have already explained, duct is basically a passage through which substance gets transported. So here also there is a transport passage. This narrow like passage is called as sperm duct, or more technically it is called as vas deferens. More technically it is called as vas deferens. Why do we call it as sperm duct? Since the sperms are getting passed through, so we are calling it as sperm duct. Now its function is to transport the matured sperms to the seminal glands. seminal glands. Fine. Now what are seminal glands? There are three basic glands which help in the motility basically of the sperm and other associated functions. So let's understand it chronologically. This first, this part, this gland is called as seminal vesicle. We called it as seminal vesicle. We called it as seminal vesicle. Then coming below, there is another gland. There is another gland somewhat here. We called it as prostate. We called it as prostate gland. And lastly, if you see this diagram carefully, this part carefully instead, we called it as Copper's gland. Copper's gland. Copper's gland. More technically, it is also called as bulbourethral gland. Bulbourethral gland. Fine. Now all the these three glands together produces a secretion. We called it as seminal fluid. We called it as seminal fluid. Together they produce, basically this has much part to play, but together all these three glands produce a secretion called as seminal fluid. Seminal fluid. Now when the sperm, the mature sperm comes and passes through all the three glands, it gets mixed up with the seminal fluid to produce another fluid that is called as semen. So semen is basically seminal fluid plus sperm makes up the semen. And this is a star mark point. Now also this Copper's gland or the bulbourethral gland produces some kind of additional secretion which helps in the lubrication of the external genital area while copulation or the process of fertilization. Now after all these processes are executed, then the sperm, since sperm is what? Sperm is a gamete. It needs some kind of medium. So that it can flow or can move smoothly. So motility has been already provided by epididymis. Now sperm has got a medium as well, that is the seminal fluid, through which it can flow more smoothly and more prominently. Now after all these processes have been executed, it passes through another duct or a passage. This is called as, this duct or the passage, I must be highlighting it. So this duct or the passage is called as urethra. This is called as urethra. So this urethra is one of the most important passage because it is a common passage. Basically it is a common passage for both sperm and urine to pass. So this is the common passage. Urethra is a common passage for both urine and sperm. Now the last part, this last part or the termination part, or we can say the opening, is called as, this opening is called as, just writing it somewhere else. This opening is called as urethral opening or meatus. Now this urethral meatus is covered by a loose fold of skin. We call this as foreskin. This is not required for 10th standard, but if you can remember, it's well and good. So now let's revise it from the beginning. So we have this testis. This is the primary male reproductive organ. Its main function is to produce sperm. Once the sperm is produced, it pass on to the another part, the posterior part of the testis, that is the coiled part. We called it as epididymis, where it provides space for the sperm to mature. Next, when the sperm has produced, it has got matured, it passes on to another tract or a duct. We called it as vas deferens or the sperm duct. Next, it goes through three basic glands, that is seminal vesicle, prostate gland and the corpus gland. Corpus gland is more technically called as bulbourethral gland as well. Any one of the name you can remember. It's not required that both the names should be kept in your mind. You can go with either of the names. Now this three glands together makes up a fluid. We called it as seminal fluid. This is a secretion with which sperm, this mature sperm, gets mixed and produces semen. Now this then after all this process has been executed, I just want to highlight a brief regarding corpus gland. This produces a secretion, an additional secretion, which helps in the lubrication during the process of copulation. Now when all these processes have been executed, it passes on to the another tract. We called it as urethra. Urethra is what? It is the common passage for both urine and sperm. The last terminal part is called as urethral meatus, and it is covered by a loose fold of skin. We called it as foreskin. We don't need to remember at this stage the terminology, the term foreskin. Now let's connect to this diagram. So now this is the lateral view. Yes. One thing which I missed here, I wanted to tell it here. This testis, the testis is covered or enveloped by a tissue or a epithelial tissue basically. We called it as scrotum or a scrotal sac or a bag-like structure. Okay, this sac or bag-like structure protects the testis inside. The testis is kept inside this sac or the pouch. We can say it as pouch. So this is called as scrotal sac or scrotum or pouch of testis. Okay. Now this coiled part which is kept at the posterior side of the testis is called as epididymis. What was its basic function? Is to make the sperms mature. Now this tube-like structure, this tract or this narrow path is called as vas deferens or the sperm duct. You may relate with that. You can relate with that labeling, the labeling which I have done there, because I don't have space here. Now it loops over the urinary bladder. So this is urinary bladder. What is urinary bladder? We have already revised this in excretory system. This is also a muscular bag where urine is stored for temporary purposes. So this is urinary bladder. Now this is seminal gland. This is seminal vesicle. Then we have this prostate, and then lastly the bulbourethral gland. Okay, this is inside it. This is the penis, which covers or envelopes the urethra. Inside it, it's a narrow passage. We called it as urethra. This outer terminating part is called as urethral meatus, and this is covered by a loose fold of skin. We called it as foreskin. Now let's make a flow chart on this, as we have done in case of female reproductive system. Starting with testis. So testis produces sperm. It produces Or let's write the parts first and then we can go with the functions. Testis. Next we have this epididymis. Then we have this vas deferens, which is commonly called as sperm duct. Now next we have the 3 seminal glands, that is the seminal vesicle. Then we have prostate gland, and finally we have bulbourethral gland. We can call it as corpus gland as well. Finally we have this urethra, and lastly, I don't have space, I'm writing it here, urethral meatus. Urethral opening also, you can say urethral opening, and if you can remember it more elaborately, then you can write urethral meatus. Now let's start with the functions along with the names written. Testis produces sperm. Epididymis provides space for the sperm to mature. Next, vas deferens provides a passage for transportation of the sperms. Next we have these glands. These glands together are called as seminal glands. So seminal fluid is basically produced by this seminal vesicle. Secrete would be more prominent term. Secretes seminal fluid with which sperm gets mixed and produces the semen. Okay. Now, this prostate and bulbourethral gland also produces some kind of secretions which helps in the motility, which improves the motility of the sperm. Then bulbourethral gland, this bulbourethral gland again secretes a chemical which helps in the lubrication of the penis while copulation. Okay, while copulation. Next we have this urethra. Urethra is common passage for both urine and sperm. And this urethral opening or the meatus is the opening part of male reproductive system. Fine. I hope you have got a good idea regarding the diagrams. and their functions as well, the associated parts. So let's end the lecture here.